Hello and a warm Collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest this morning, Mr. Elliott Schneier. How you doing, Elliot?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Tyler.
Oh, thanks for coming on, man. I originally got on my radar. You have recently joined the team over at Virtual Gurus, and anyone who's listened to the show to any degree knows I'm a big fan, big supporter. Bobby's a rock star. Love everything about her and what she's doing and the organization. And it's a great Calgary story. And you are not in Calgary. So where are you calling in from this morning to let our guests know the broad reach of this conversation?
The broad reach, first time caller. I am actually in Columbus, Ohio. Before this, we had an office, but in my previous job, we had an office in Columbus, Portland, San Francisco, kind of in the Tenderloin district, and down in Santa Monica. And during COVID, we let this was back at startups.com, we let all of the leases expire and eventually had the entire business remote. So I remained in Columbus, and that's where I am today.
I love it. So you guys have been remote we also went full remote, and I've definitely got nothing but, you had to make some changes to make it work. And with those changes, it's been a 5-star experience. Just before we get back into Virtual Gurus and your role there, talk to me a little bit about the switch to remote and what your experience has kind of been around that, as that epic debate still seems to rage in little pockets here and there. So
Tyler, it's tough, especially within my position as the COO. And, the one thing I will say is, It magnifies bad hires and bad teammates as much as it magnifies good hires and good teammates.
I like that.
So in a big part of it, from an organizational standpoint, is when you put in a good management system, like an OKR-based system, an objective key result system, and you've got stakeholders and timelines, and you've got ratcheted up communication via Slack or via Zoom, you can make it work. However, there's some important nuance that goes by the wayside. We had, when we were growing startups.com and eventually got to, nearly 300 employees, there were several people that I hadn't met in person, right? Yeah. So much of, being a good teammate and being a good operator is understanding a bit of the backstory and having some context on how to motivate and collaborate with people. And if your entire relationship is shrunk down into, lines of text where, it doesn't pick up good context via Slack, it can create a real challenge, right? So it's the moments where you can go have lunch, the moments where you can pop into a conference room, some of that kind of off time is what really allows you to build some of those relationships and get a deeper understanding of who you're working with. And I don't take that part lightly, right? I've, within VG, recognizing it's remote, all of the relationships I've formed thus far have been certainly remote. It's all been Zoom, phone, and Slack. And I can say, asking good questions, spending a little bit of time talking outside of work is really helpful. But I have no doubt that when I go up to Calgary next month, those relationships will further crystallize, and I'll really get to know the people, right? So yes, remote can work as long as you've got a really thoughtful process and a really good cadence of communication. However, remote also comes with challenges that certainly can't be overlooked. I understand both sides. I understand, when big tech founders are wanting to bring people back in the office, and I understand why big tech founders are saying that's ridiculous to have this massive lease on the P&L. So I get both sides.
The tug of war, but the deliberate and intentionality around, I can take for granted that I might bump into you in the kitchen or on the way to the bathroom, or the Pixar story, put the bathroom in the middle so everybody runs into everybody. The intentionality around that, I found just as a leader, as an owner, founder, taking that time, I remember early on in COVID, my office manager, I say that in quotes because we didn't have an office anymore. She goes, Tyler, when you used to go to Toronto, you'd go and have coffee with the staff. She goes, what's stopping you from doing that virtually? And I'm like, oh, thank you for calling me out on just such an obvious gap. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I started and again, no agenda except you and what was important to you. And with a smaller team and, 30, 40 people over the course of every quarter, I could work through those conversations, but I had to be very intentional about making time to do it, or months would slip by, to your point.
It really does. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole with a level of too much granularity, but in person, because there's no camera on you, you can really start to read signals within people. You can start to understand how, they're sitting, I'm not trying to be a forensic psychologist here, but on camera, by definition, it's kind of an awkward interaction, right? You're looking at yourself, you're looking at the other person. It's not a one-for-one replacement of, sitting in a coffee shop on a cozy couch where everybody's shoulders are down and you can just have that conversation. There is a performative component to Zoom calls, no matter how many times you're on them. And I never overlook that.
This is a rabbit hole, like as the lost art of a beautiful conversation of where we're going to go. So just to clarify, you have not been to Calgary yet. You've taken like this job and this process of coming on board with Virtual Gurus, which we're going to get into here. That was all done virtually.
That was all done virtually. I can give you, this may be an appropriate time to jump in and give a little of the backstory as to how I got there, if you feel like that's good. So I won't give you the full Elliot origin story. I can assure you it's it
was a dark day in early October.
Yeah, right. October 1978. But I've been an entrepreneur for a long time. And, I've built some big startups that were venture backed, and I've had some spectacular venture backed failures that have taught me a tremendous amount.
Nice. Appreciate it.
And within our last company, startups.com, we built or bought 8 businesses that ultimately created, when tethered together, a massive online founder accelerator, right? So servicing 1.2 million users using a virtual model. So we had to get used to this pretty early. Within that portfolio, we acquired a company almost 9 years ago from Mayfield and the late Tony Hsieh, founded by Maren Kate Donovan, called Zirtual. Zirtual was really the first premium U.S.-based college-educated virtual assistant company. Okay? So we buy Zirtual effectively on a Sunday, and it's a wild story, and you can Google that story, and we had to operationalize it, and there was a lot of different challenges. But we were able to get the company stood up, and we were able to get to the company incredibly profitable and growing. During this time, I think it was Jill Nelson, the founder of Ruby Receptionist, connects me with Bobby. And I think Jill was saying, hey, you're going to really like Bobby. I know you're competitors, but it would be great to have a conversation. And Bobby and I, despite the fact that we were competitors, started to build our relationship probably 4 years ago. And Bobby classifies herself as my annoying little sister, because she would call me and she would ask me questions about churn or about utilization. And I just really liked Bobby. I mean, you've interviewed Bobby. She's an inspiring person. She's an optimist. She has a lot of my favorite qualities that a great CEO has. And I was happy to help. My mentality at the time was there's plenty of market here. While they were certainly coming into North America and certainly coming down to the United States, there was so much market. I really valued the friendship. I valued the relationship. And we just, we built this awesome work and then to a degree personal friendship over the years. So fast forward to last year. Last year, we sold Zirtual in December to a private equity firm. And Bobby and I continue to have these conversations. Virtual Gurus is in this really unique position where it's got a really strong foundation, and now it's ready to scale and explode. And in talking to Bobby and kind of looking what I'd been doing over the last 10 or 11 years, we started to talk about what would it look like if I parachuted into this, recognizing I've got, almost a decade of mistakes and a decade of success building a very similar business, right? And I use the gross golf term, but I can putt second, right? Or Bobby can putt second by way of that, because I've, spent all this time running such a similar business. So a few of the things that Bobby and I talked about, one was, she needed somebody with my experience to come in at an operational level and help scale the business, both on the ops side and the acquisition side, which I was really excited about. But one of the things that Bobby and I also talked about is I said, Bobby, I know you want to do this, but we've got to expand capabilities, right? Expand capabilities to virtual receptionists, bookkeeping, and beyond, right? Anything, really any type of administrative resource that doesn't require a subjective value creation. The subject of value creation would be design, right? It's very hard to run a business like this where you've got a lot of designers because of all the different cycles. So she said, let's do it, right? And eventually, I had a chance to meet with the board, and I really liked the board. I had a chance to meet with leadership, and we were able to get to the appropriate terms, really about a month and a half ago. And I came in running, right? And I because of my history, I typically move at a pretty fast pace, especially when I kind of know what plays to run. And in this case, it wasn't talent, it was just experience. And to the team's credit, everybody has been compliant, excited, agile, all those ridiculous tech buzzwords. But the reality is they are.
Buzzword bingo.
Buzzword palooza.
Yeah.
So, the biggest initiatives, I would say, within Virtual Gurus right now, one is scaling outbound. Okay, I won't get too tactical, Tyler, but with a business like Virtual Gurus, your ability to pay for clicks, right? Whether it's Bing or LinkedIn or you name it, Google specifically, is limited because there's a limited number of high intent keyword searches every single month. Right, yeah. It's like 47,000.
There's a point where more budget doesn't make a difference. Right?
Exactly. So you say, okay, shit, we're sorry for saying shit, but we're restricted.
It's okay. It's a PG-13 podcast.
Okay, PG-13, we can get there. We're restricted as a business. If we were selling diet pills, right? While hyper competitive, there's more keywords than you could bid on, right? Mm-hmm. Or more clicks than you could bid on. So the first concept was being able to build a really sophisticated outbound process, both with scaled email, SDRs, and beyond. And that's launched. Again, to the team's credit, we were able to install it and get it launched. And it's kicking ass, right? It's growing very quickly. And the whole concept is push-based marketing, getting your value proposition or getting the problem in front of strangers that didn't click. Okay? The second piece was, again, on this expansion of capability. We found when we were at Zirtual, when we partnered with Ruby, that there was a tremendous amount of overlap in our user base within what their needs were. A lot of our users that needed a virtual assistant also needed a virtual receptionist. So
customers that bought this also need this.
Absolutely. And from a business standpoint, it's great, right? Average order size goes up, LTV goes up, right? It becomes a stickier product.
Yeah, but you also it hangs around for longer. Yeah.
It hangs around, right? LTV goes up. But you're also able to give a client, a customer, a more robust virtual back office solution. Okay.
You're ultimately able to solve the problem in a more complete way, or the challenge,
Absolutely.
The opportunity, whatever word you want to use. But ultimately, I'm looking for you to solve my problems and make things better for me. And if I don't have to go to multiple contacts to do that, as a customer, that's by default easier.
Absolutely. It's all in one dashboard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right on.
And so we are in the process of, this is a bit of a spoiler alert, we're in the process of launching a very sophisticated, exciting, AI-powered virtual receptionist / virtual chat / virtual text product that will probably be out for beta in about 30 days.
Amazing.
Right?
That's been in the works for a while, right? If I'm not mistaken, I know Bobby has hinted. We've had conversations where she's like, "Oh, we got something. We're working on it," and so that is getting near it's starting to roll. It's the end of the runway. It's V1 liftoff speed.
We are so close. And in this case, what expedited the process is we brought in some really talented developers from Northern California that had a source code that we could build on top of. Because as you know, AI is appropriately open source, and what you're really doing is you're waiting on new releases and you're trying to build customization on top of the code. So we're basically there, right? So now, from a business standpoint, the two big moves, the two big North Stars are expand capability and expand outbound outreach. What I dig about what Bobby is doing is while it's a two-sided transaction, both sides win. On one side, you get to place in the VA space, the virtual assistant place, somebody from a marginalized workforce into a great job. On the other side, you get to work with a wonderful business or wonderful entrepreneur and help them focus on growth tasks versus keeping them mired in all of these fairly mundane tasks that still need to be done, but divert a tremendous amount of focus. And that's part of what always attracted me to this type of business, is kind of this two-sided win within the marketplace, right? It feels awesome, right? You're helping somebody find a job and you're helping somebody else grow their business. It's not always that case.
Oh, it's such a true opportunity for, I remember early days of growing businesses of like, sure, all of you can do this task, but who's the best to do it and who can only do this other task? And until you do that well in an organization, you do literally end up you end up doing all the tasks, right? Versus, like you said, these need to get done. And sure, I'm capable as a leader, a founder, or a senior individual, but there's other tasks that no one else can do but me. I should be focusing on like the make or breaks, or however, whatever framework you want to use to touch on that.
In this, kind of modern economy, there are two really massive components that I think, as a business owner and somebody that's been building businesses for a while, face. One is you've got growing wages, and two, you have a tremendous amount of the labor force dormant. Okay. So take that side of the equation and pair that with the fact that workloads are lumpy by nature, right? There's no situation where you're like, I have exactly the right amount of work to hire a full-time equivalent, right? To hire a W-2.
Back to even utilization and what's an FTE, what's FTE look like. And you're right. We look at one side of it as very even keel across the year, but then that's not how real work happens. That's
okay. That's the nature of it. But it's really tough, recognizing some of the big macroeconomic factors for a business to thrive when it has, basically relatively dormant W-2s. When there's another solution out there, which is where you can divide your workload up with a scalpel, right, instead of a shotgun, right? You can actually bring in the appropriate amount of resource hours you need to get all this stuff off your plate without overspending on, in the United States, it would be everything from payroll tax to insurance.
From an adoption perspective, I love that you've been, in this very, very specific field since 2015. What's the adoption cycle look like with companies? Was it small companies embraced it early, now large companies getting on board? Was it the other way around? Or is it more cultural and nuanced based on just the organization and how they look at getting work done?
So it's a great question. So with Zirtual, it started off almost all tech companies. Right. They loved the concept of a subscription model. They loved the ability, tech companies love the ability to quantify appropriately. So they love to be able to measure and see, okay, are we using these 10 hours? While there are certainly stories of big Silicon Valley companies blowing through money, there are other stories of, almost a maniacal level of scrutiny around output. So the first big adopters were for Zirtual at least, were Silicon Valley startups. And then it started to really, really, really expand. Everything to big healthcare systems, to universities. Our biggest sector, both at Zirtual and now at Virtual Gurus, are nonprofits, right? And if you think about it, it makes a tremendous amount of sense. You've got a nonprofit that's typically task-rich and resource-poor, yes. Right? And they've got a lot of work. And for a nonprofit, a $1 to $10 million asset under management nonprofit, the hoops they have to jump through to hire somebody new are pretty unbearable. Whereas they can pay $500 a month or $600 a month and get a tremendous amount of that work done without having to go through that process of bringing on a W-2, training, onboarding, all that kind of good stuff. Well, so nonprofits continues to be an awesome, awesome sector for us to focus on.
And all the tools and experiences, hiring is a risky proposition at the best of times, from Absolutely. A full-time perspective. It just is. I've yet to hone my mind reading and my ESP skills to be able to think I'm a mind reader. And so you bring in tools and it still is a challenge versus I have stuff that I need to get done and I need to get it done tomorrow.
Absolutely. And again, that speaks to the pace of the modern economy, right? A brick and mortar store, 15 to 20 years ago, didn't need to care about email lists or social media, right? Now that's table stakes, right? You got to be able to do that. Everybody has to be able to do that. So
just to be in business, the task list from on the burden of the business has increased exponentially. I'm glad that you brought that up. Yeah.
You're competing with others that are doing it well. So again, going back to the concept of this is table stakes, you need to have that capability, and we can provide that capability, and we can provide that capability within a pretty good economic package.
And it's such a challenge when you look at the core competencies of so many businesses of what they do, but yet, oh, by the way, you also have to have a core competency in managing your CRM. Or like it does push you to be good at almost an unrealistic amount of things.
Yes.
Where you need those extra resources. And, I need the expert, but I don't need them to be a full-time equivalent.
Right. And then, I go down the other side, which is, everybody says they're a social media manager. Everybody says they're an SEM expert, and they're not, right? They're they're well intentioned, but you could end up boiling $50,000 in 6 months of time to get no result. And again, that's really tough for a small business or a large business.
Yeah, well, it's like going to Vegas with your buddy who says who says they have a system, and then you trust them with your money. Sometimes It feels a lot like that.
It does. It does. Listen, I've been doing this for almost 2 decades, and I've been burned by agencies time and time again.
Yeah, and
not to say that agencies are bad.
Being on the agency side, oftentimes your first barrier is who screwed you before we got here, and how do we make sure Tyler, we don't do that, right?
And that's true, right? That's absolutely true.
Elliot, thinking about, looking at of course, I'm a LinkedIn creeper like so many people, like the chief operating officer role. If you were to, what's your, I heard this in a podcast recently, somebody used it, like kind of what's your hammer? If your hammer was, I'm a product guy, I make amazing products and people, I'm a marketing guy or gal, I'm a finance, I'm, obviously operations would make sense. When you come into a business, you've got such deep, roots of experience. What's your hammer? What are those couple things that you're looking for the nail, right?
So you can no longer, in my opinion, you cannot be the COO of a tech company without a meaningful understanding of all units of the business, right? Yeah. So I can build sequences in HubSpot. I can set up a paid campaign. In part of the challenge there is, yes, at a high level, what an operator is supposed to do is understand the North Stars, right? Understand these massive objectives of the business and be able to build an initiative plan with actions and stakeholders and quantifiable measures to get there, right? It's kind of your typical OKR system. However, you have to have an understanding of all of the different sides of the business and get smart on them, or you have to bring people in that you trust that can bring you measurable impact within those different business units. So if you said, hey, Elliot, kind of what's your hammer? I think it's one, having a breadth of knowledge around, and it sounds like a kind of a dubious thing, but even a CEO or COO has to have a deep understanding of a lot of different components of the business. So nobody's trying to pull one over on them, but so they understand what questions to ask when you're making specific bets, whether it's on acquisition or whether it's on back-end hiring or whether it's on, installing some type of new operating system. You've got to have some understanding to be able to ask the right questions in that situation.
Yeah, just the magic of a well-placed question.
You're right. Right. And that's true. That's absolutely the truth. And it's tough, but objectivity, right? It's really
holding
hard.
Opposing ideas. Yeah, absolutely.
You've got to be objective. And it's hard. And as a COO, especially, when I was a CEO of bigger companies, you've got limited resources within the company, and you've got every business unit lobbying for those resources. Rightfully so, by the way, right? Everybody wants to make more hires. Everybody wants to increase marketing spend. The tech team wants more engineers. So you've got to be able to understand and develop a hierarchy and a plan to say what's going to be mission critical now, and by achieving that, how does that unlock more budget, and really kind of stack ranking where you're going to start to apply a lot of those different resources. Every tech company has that same problem, which is hierarchy of bets and assumptions. But going back to the objectivity, a good leader should be optimistic, but a good leader should also be able to read the tea leaves and understand when to pull out of a bet. right? Yeah. And that's not always easy because we as founders, as somebody that's been a founder, get so intertwined with our business that it's hard to be able to step back and say, okay, I wanted this to work so bad. I thought this was going to work. I just know in my bones it's going to work, and it didn't work. I got to pull out. We got to collect the data and try something different. That's really hard for a founder. How
would you, how do you and how would you recommend maintaining that objectivity when you're literally drinking your own Kool-Aid on a daily basis?
So it's a great question. And, as I said, I spent, damn near the last decade coaching founders.
So you might be a highly qualified individual to answer this question.
So part of it is build great experiments, right? A startup is an experiment. It absolutely is. At an early stage to a later stage, it's just that the experiment becomes that much more complicated. And when you're going to do anything, you need to be able to build this experiment with enough intention that you're going to be able to pull high fidelity data out that will allow you to make a decision. That could mean sticking with a program for 3 to 6 months. That could mean spending a lot of money on Facebook and waiting for the lookalike ads or the lookalike audience to start to crystallize. That could mean installing a management system on the back end. But you want to be able to quantify the success of all of these different experiments, right? The biggest measurable of success on the operations side for Virtual Gurus is churn. And there's so much that goes into it. So the way you look at churn is if we're supposed to collect $100 a month from our users and we collect 90, that churn's 10%. If you look at how do you affect churn, that's everything from communication plans to pushing utilization to hiring to training to onboarding to pace of loading to speed of matching. But all of these different assumptions and all these different initiatives have to drive to a specific number, and you have to measure what matters. You have to be able to have a measurable to understand, was this initiative a success or was this initiative not a success, and why, right? So going back full circle, when you're going to run an acquisition campaign or you're going to try something on the tech side, you've got to set up a measurable to create that objectivity. And you've got to stick with it and suffer the pain until you get the data to be able to, I hate to use the term, pivot or push.
How challenging or how much have you seen working with the startups that you have? I've seen so many, I've worked with so many organizations like, oh, we're testing. I'm like, oh, great. What are you testing? And then they list off 12 things. I'm like, okay. What are we actually testing? How much discipline or how much is that problematic? Because it's easy to say, we're going to run an experiment. We're going to test and learn. I've heard that, you hear that more times than I care to. But often when you dig in, that what we're testing, what you just said, has not been quantified or certainly clarified, or the half a dozen people that might be involved are all looking at it from a different side of the elephant. How critical is that from just an operational discipline to get that right? It sounds like I'm just paraphrasing back, but I just hear it said so often, Tyler, but not executed.
It's the plague of every founder, right? Every new founder is a new founder.
Yeah.
But here's kind of how the sequential process works. Let's say you're somewhat idea stage, right? And you've built a low fidelity MVP, a low fidelity minimum viable product. It could be a landing page, it could be a Figma. The first thing a founder needs to understand is how to articulate the problem and how to get it in front of the right people. That's one. The second is getting those people to take some level of action to solve the problem using your solution. That's two. So those are the front end. So whether you're running Facebook ads or you're getting in front of people, acquiring user consideration is the first step. I was able to articulate the problem. This problem resonated with who I thought it was going to resonate with, and they took action. And that action can be everything. The user consideration component is like a ladder. The top rung of the ladder is somebody gives you a credit card and pays for your solution. The bottom rung is probably somebody gives you an email and wants to hear more. Yeah, in between there's letters
curiosity
of intent, there's
to
pilot programs.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's incumbent on the founder to be able to get their problem in front of a stranger and have the stranger take action. The second part of that is use as prescribed. So let's say you're developing a really cool mobile app and you solve the problem of getting your mobile app out there and getting downloads. But within your mobile app, there's a usage velocity, right? There's something you want people to do and nobody's doing it. That's the second layer of the problem to address, and that's kind of where you were talking about. I'm going to fire out 12 features. You start with the features the ultimate problem solving features, right? That's what you start with, and then you expand from there. The features within a technology that solve 85% of the problem, not the nuanced bonus features that people may use, and then you get scope creep, and then you get false positive data. So within that sequence, the first part is, how do I get people to take action on this problem I'm putting in front of them? The second piece is, how do I get them to use my tech or my service the way I intended, and how do I learn from that? If you can just get over that chasm, you've started to build a business.
I really love what you said about understanding, like, okay, we got them to download the app, but now they're not using it in the way. Okay, so clearly something was right in our first message, but what was and like really staging the learning.
Right,
trying to
so you
understand,
can,
we got to this plateau. Let's reorganize our gear before we climb to the next plateau because, oh shit, the same. Well, I don't know. I'm using mountain climbing analogies. I'm not a mountain climber, but it's like, oh, we got to here. Oh, the same gear is going to get me. Well, no, but there's ice in between, so I need a different set of gear to get up there.
And there's a lot you toil with there. There's UX components. There's a way that the way you're guiding people through the technology. And I'm always, every founder appropriately is like this: less friction, keep it simple initially, right? Always. Big CTAs, very clear messaging, get people into it, make everything incredibly, incredibly usable on the front end. Because you want to set up a control. You want to be able to say, if they can't understand how to use this dead simple system, there's no way they're going to understand it when I layer in all this additional tech.
So for you coming into a company like Virtual Gurus, and again, I want to speak hypothetically, but I know we're speaking about a very specific, I guess, how much of your role is also to look at like, okay, what are some of the legacy ways you've done it? And is that still going to fit, or like you made the call earlier, no, we've got product market fit. We need to scale. That's an outbound, reduced churn. It sounds like you're coming in with a degree of confidence. Feels like we're sharing dirty laundry here, which I don't want to do at all.
That's okay.
But obviously, there's got to be that look. You're like, I would have done that a little bit different, but I think it's good I think it's going to work. Or let's use it, and then we'll make adjustments based on what we learn going forward. Just thinking about your role as one month freshly minted.
Well, the first thing I did, Tyler, and this was a conversation that Bobby and I had with the board, was I audited everything. I audited, we audited the tech stack and what they were working on, audited the customer acquisition process, audited, and we're still auditing the operational process. And here's what I can say about VG. They've made all the right decisions and all the wrong decisions, in my opinion. They're doing exactly what they should be doing. It's a really well-run business, to Bobby's credit. And some of this is survival. Some of it is, because it's so hard to run a business, some of it is making the right bets at the right time and having enough time and enough financial solvency to adjust. And to their credit, they've absolutely had that. They continue to grow year over year and continue to adjust year over year. It takes, a lot of people think that, startups go from zero to unicorn in 3 years. It's like 12 years.
Is that
it
what
takes
the
a
average
lot
is?
of time to
That's
get it right.
He's right, because the media loves to portray it as the first option.
Yeah,
the 12-year overnight success, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it's a grind. In again, to the team's credit, they've done everything. Certainly nobody does everything right, because that's part of how you learn. But they were wildly well positioned to start to scale this thing. Bobby did a tremendous job. Rob, who's the CTO, did a tremendous job. Jeff did a tremendous job. I could go down the list, and there's a lot of talented, accountable, interested people.
I love it. And you've made the decision with your buy-in. Like, you're there, you're committed. So clearly that speaks volumes. Talk to me a little bit about, let's do a little bit of a pulse check just on the world at large. What are you seeing from an investment perspective? Obviously we've heard lots of like tightening and valuations changing and some of the challenges. Obviously, being in the US, dealing in the role that you were dealing with startups.com, you had to be constantly in the conversation of what's happening with funding,
Tyler.
where's the money, who's pulling back, what's going on. We're having to do a down round, like all the words, right?
Yeah,
all the words.
One of our businesses at startups was called Fundable, where we helped founders raise in excess of $750 million in investment capital. So we were deeply involved in understanding what the market is doing. I'll give you kind of the 30,000 foot.
Please.
If you go back, it was a perfect storm of challenges. Certainly COVID didn't help, but really what changed the market today, in my opinion, were, these big blue chip firms, the Sequoias, the Bessemers, the Tigers, the so on and so forth, of which some of them have been smart or dumb enough to invest in me and others. They were chasing deals to the register, right? They were getting into these big DE rounds at these inflated valuations. And their concept was, hey, we'll ride this thing all the way. We'll put $350 million pre-IPO. And when it IPOs, it's going to go crazy. And there's going to be a massive liquidity event. Yes, we have to put more money out, but the deal's fairly de-risked. Well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
Right? So IPO flop after IPO flop, acquisitions went down. So the entire market as a whole, the investor market, had to rethink their approach, which is why you see so many of these big firms, whether it's A16Z or Drive Capital in the Midwest, focusing on seed, right? And pre-seed, where you can get a bigger equity bite for less money. You can put $3 million in and take 33% of the business and ride along with it, right? So your cash exposure is that much lower up front. So the ability to get into deals earlier and get into deals that have some level of profitability is becoming paramount. Okay?
Is there a little more, based on that model, are you seeing a little more, is there a little more patient capital where we know we're early round, we're going to be in for a while? Or is that me just oversimplifying that equation?
I think there's so much thought, and a lot of my friends are in VC. There's so much thought in pricing the deal right, in the solvency of the business. I think the pixie dust, forget about how they're going to pay us. This is really cool tech is going away, right? Okay. Now, a lot of the focus is on traction and solvency to be able to create good businesses.
That sounds great to me, Elliot. It sounds like a healthier ecosystem at the end of that.
It is. It makes it more competitive, without a doubt. A lot of the founders I talk to that are raising pre-seed and seed, it's really competitive. Seed round companies are doing $850,000 to $1 million a year in their annual run rate, right? That wasn't a seed stage 7 years ago, but it's going to build healthier businesses.
How it's defined has changed. Yeah,
absolutely. seed round's like a Series A now. The other part is people do need to write checks, right? The way, and I was just talking to a friend that's a managing director I'll leave it unnamed, but I'll call it a tier 1 VC.
Okay.
They raise billions and billions of dollars from limited partners, okay? Let's say one of the limited partners is a massive teacher's pension, $96 billion assets under management. They need to diversify some of their money outside of private equity, traditional equity, and real estate. So they get into VC. Well, when the venture capitalists aren't writing checks, that's dead money, right? Especially as these other components of their investment start to rebound, right? The equity market starts to get better. So now they've got, $120 million into a VC just sitting there because the managing partners and the venture capitalists just don't feel bullish on writing those checks. So I've seen a lot of these LPs, the leadership within these LPs say, hey, yeah, we get it. It's a bad market, but you're supposed to be a really good investor in a good market and a bad market. So you got to start deploying this capital because it's just sitting on the sideline.
Yeah,
so
that's not why I gave you the money.
Exactly. Yeah. I gave you the money to make a return. I get it. The market's tough. Markets rebound. Be great at your job and figure out how to pick winners, even in a market that's having this type of headwind.
Which I appreciate that. So you run that one out a little bit. That seems like capital freeing up, but with a lot more, maybe a little bit more discipline around it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Perspective from outside the bubble. Obviously, you're in Ohio. Calgary's on your radar one way or another. Thoughts on, this company's based in Calgary. Good thing, bad thing, doesn't matter, neutral. That's a bit of a loaded question, I do realize. But just curious, always the perspective. We think we are who we are, but you can't see the label when you're inside the bottle. So I always love an outside perspective.
Working at startups.com and servicing, 1 million plus founders, we worked with a lot of founders based out of Canada. We worked closely with the Bench team in Vancouver. We saw Shopify very early. We saw some great tech coming out of Canada as a whole.
Okay.
And there are a lot of, secondary and tertiary cities all around the, Canada and the United States that are starting to bring great tech out to the market. And because knowledge is democratized, you no longer have to be an MIT grad or a Stanford MBA to understand how to do things like acquire users or build something in HubSpot. You can use no code, low code. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do because everything's relatively democratized from anywhere, right? So your academic pedigree or your geography is starting to matter less. Now, let me give the other side to that. They're highly experienced people in tech are still in Silicon Valley. They're still in Cambridge. They're still in New York. They're still, from a concentration standpoint, they're still in Los Angeles. They're still in Austin to some degree. So a lot of the people that have had experience building these venture companies and having some level of success are still in those pockets, right? So I don't want to pretend that I'm in Columbus, Ohio, right? We have a huge VC here called Drive Capital, but Columbus isn't San Francisco. Just from the experience level and the depth of talent, we call it the depth of bench. It's not there. However, again, all these cities, whether it's Calgary, Toronto, Columbus, Indianapolis, Denver, just naming kind of secondary markets, are starting to push out great tech companies.
So really, beyond the talent access or the talent being at the coffee shop that you also go to, also you're dealing with products and offerings that are borderless to a certain extent, from at least a Canada to US perspective.
Absolutely. And it's great. If I had my druthers, everybody would take a shot at being an entrepreneur. I think they're
the learning is exponential, and you can lay it out, but it's always going to be I'm not sure. Well, you said 1978. Entrepreneur wasn't a cool word when we were younger, Elliot, if I remember correctly.
No, it meant you're unemployed.
It meant you couldn't get a quote unquote real job.
Exactly. And now it's sensational.
Which is another problem, I think.
I totally agree. I think
that creates a bit of a monster too.
It has swung a little too far, where everybody wants to be a content creator. Everybody wants to build the next great tech, but doesn't really spend the time to understand how to build a business, how to get revenue, how to get customers, and that's okay. I love the overarching energy. While there's some level of false confidence and false optimism, is still producing more great entrepreneurs, at least in the tech space, than we've ever had. I'd say in a lot of different spaces, direct to consumer, retail. It's wonderful.
Well, and so many of those have tech undertones and underpinnings. What tech isn't a sector as much as it's just a reality, depending on how you want to.
That's a great way to say it, Tyler, and I totally agree with you.
Elliot, crystal ball a little bit. Obviously, you've touched on it. If you look at the next few years when it comes to the entrepreneurship journey, the startup journey, obviously you're on your path, but such a cool, with what you've been involved with Fundable and Clarity and LaunchRock. As I creep on your LinkedIn and do some Googling here before we got on, what's the crystal ball look like for you over the next few years, specifically just talking about North America, if that's not too limiting, worlds without borders?
There are a handful of really cool verticals that are exciting to me. I think agriculture technology, there's a great program up at MIT, is incredibly exciting. And, how can we make more, better, cleaner food at scale? And there's a lot of great things that are happening there. I think AI, I know everybody beats that drum. AI is the first usable tech that has had this type of sensational press that I can remember almost since the internet, right?
I was going to say since the internet, yeah. 100%.
I mean, I was there for Internet of Things. I was there for 3D printing. I was there for all this kind of stuff. But it is so absolutely usable. Somebody jumping on ChatGPT, it's mind-blowing. And I do think that will have, at a high level, a positive effect, because it'll create efficiencies and further, democratize skill and speed. But the other area I really like is, I'd kind of categorize it almost as manufacturing tech, which is, how can we build better stuff with more efficiency in a cleaner way? I really, really like that.
Oh, there's some cool impacts of like even happening in the home builder space and like a lot of those build things worlds that have kind of stuck to their knitting a little bit for a long time, but technology is really beating down the door there. I see,
and it is.
I'm having lots of cool conversations lately that are like, oh, how's it showing up and disrupting your world? Quote unquote, hopefully, for the better, but maybe we're not at that phase yet. We're at the disruption phase.
We are. We're kind of at there's some great tech, great monitoring tech. There's some efficiency tech. There's some really incredible things happening in advanced robotics. And I did spend a year and a half at a massive global manufacturer, and I love it. There's almost nothing cooler than taking raw materials and building something usable. So I'm bullish and optimistic on that moving forward as well.
Well, it's so easy to get wrapped up in, so much of our world is SaaS based and software and technology, but yet we still live in a world surrounded by physical things. So it's an interesting balance, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's I have two young kids, and they're dopamine addicts, right? And so much of the tech that they use is just lighten up that dopamine, right? Fast little hits, and it breaks my heart that they're not outside and they're not building, and they certainly are outside. They're not on their iPads all day. But if we took some of the same energy and same inertia and same intelligence around some of these great, what I would call dopamine banks that are being built, you name it, Roblox, TikTok, you name it,
totally,
and applied those to bigger, more interesting problems. Oh, what a world!
Oh, that's another podcast.
I know,
really
man.
opened the philosophical bubble on that one. I love it.
Yeah.
Elliot, so appreciative of you taking the time. And I think, for the audience, I think I gave your team a link 48 hours ago, and boom, I woke up, I was like, oh, look who's in my calendar this morning at 8:30. That's amazing. So thank you for being no time like the present. And I joked off air, welcome to Calgary. I am a huge supporter of Virtual Gurus, and to have someone like yourself with your background and I love the relationship that you and Bobby built over time. So when it came time, that was already in the bank. You'd already built that foundation. That's so critical as founders and business owners. You get, head down, ass up. You got to get out there and meet the people, because you don't know when that relationship is going to pay off. And not much in life happens without relationships, in my experience.
Absolutely true. And I don't know where people can post it, but I would love some restaurant recommendations. I love food. When I come up to Calgary, Tyler, you and I can
Elliot,
definitely go get a meal.
Give me a call. I have a friend who moved here from Toronto, runs a big HR-based payroll startup here that's doing really well, and he has a list that is impressive.
I want the list.
He goes and he has a discipline and a rating scale that
I love it.
This is what restaurants in Calgary look like. And I moved here 20 years ago from Montreal, which has an amazing food scene. And Calgary has got nothing but better. Like, it's improved.
Come on.
It gets, I wouldn't say it's better than Montreal, but from when I moved here till now, it was all chains and it was not pretty 20 years ago. It's so much better, exponentially better now. So
I'm psyched about
you're coming at a good time, Elliot.
Yeah, I'm psyched. I want to get up there. I want to spend a lot of time at VG's HQ, and then I want to get up to Banff and
if you like to, back to your point about, dopamine from the natural world versus the computers in our hand. I joke sometimes people have coffee table books about that's an hour away from us. So definitely when you come up here, there are some drives to take that will literally blow your mind.
Tyler, Bobby sent me pictures and I was like, that's not real. She was like, oh, no, that's 42 minutes away. I was like, that can't be real. She's like, no, I could drive there.
She got an RV last year, so I know she's out. Bobby actually just lives around the corner from me. It's great. You live in a small town and you're like, oh, hey, there's Bobby on her lawn. Weird. I didn't know we were neighbors. So literally she lives like 2 blocks from me. And I know she got into camping last year and got her RV and got out there. Man, it can blow your mind. So anyway,
I'm psyched.
This is a pitch for Calgary. Anybody, it's one of those cities, like, once you get here, it gets more awesome. And you're like, oh, I didn't realize that is 100% reality for this. I love this province and this city. It's great.
I dig it, Tyler. I dig it. I'm excited.
Elliot, what's the best way if somebody wants to, is it LinkedIn? Like, what's your, there's a million ways to get a hold. Do you have a preference if somebody wants to hit you up?
People can hit me on LinkedIn. People can shoot me a direct email, Elliot at virtualgurus.com. It's 2 L's, 1 T. You can post it if you want to post it.
Nice, amazing.
But I'd say, LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to just hit me up and talk.
Amazing. Yeah, it is. It's the one social media platform that I feel hasn't quite jumped the shark yet. But that's
not
another
yet.
conversation.
Not yet.
They're trying some days, and then they seem to dial it back a little bit.
It's still in good control.
Elliot, really enjoyed our conversation.
Awesome,
Thank you, my
Tyler.
friend. And again, it's a date. I look forward to when you let me know when you're coming to town, and we'll find some time to squeeze in a handshake and a restaurant tour.
I would love that, man. Thank you, Tyler. This was
All right,
great.
thanks, brother.
All right, thank you, man.